Good afternoon and welcome to the College of Continuing and Professional Studies webinar, Delivering Effective Feedback. Thank you so much for joining us today. Next slide, please. It's a pleasure to have you all here this afternoon. My name is Shanta Bulai, and I'll be your moderator for today's webinar. If you have future questions about this webinar or other programs that we offer, the college's contact information will be on the last slide of this presentation. I'm delighted to introduce the topic for today's webinar, Delivering Effective Feedback. Effective feedback is a powerful tool for professional growth, one that fosters a culture of accountability and continuous improvement. During this session, you will gain ready-to-apply insights and practical strategies to enhance your feedback-giving abilities. You will learn how to navigate challenging conversations, deliver feedback with empathy and clarity, and create an environment that promotes open communication and mutual respect. Whether you are a manager, team leader, or individual contributor, we'll equip you with the skills and knowledge to provide critical feedback effectively. In this webinar, we will cover the importance of critical feedback, building rapport and trust, the feedback process, effective communication skills, emotional intelligence in feedback, and overcoming resistance and defensiveness. It's a pleasure to introduce the presenter for today's webinar, Carolyn Morris. Carolyn has applied psychology and business insights to challenges faced by leaders and teams as an organizational consultant, speaker, and coach, focusing on candor, accountability, and change for more than 30 years. Carolyn, thank you so much for being with us and sharing your wisdom on this topic. I will pass it over to you now.
Yes, thank you so much, Shanta, and the whole team. I really appreciate being back here for another wonderful topic, such a relevant topic. So again, CCAPS team, thank you for making this happen and everything that it takes behind the scenes. I appreciate you all. And welcome, people. I am excited to see so many people in the room about a topic that is maybe not so popular when you have to put it to practice. I think it may describe most of us if I say that we dislike and maybe even hate giving feedback as well as receiving feedback, and maybe even more so on the receiving end. The second thing that might apply to most of us, and it certainly applies to me, is that we dislike being criticized when we receive feedback. And oftentimes we equate feedback with criticism. And then I think we generally are sensitive to hearing about our imperfections, yet we all have imperfections unless you're some kind of a robot or AI in the room. And I think it just makes us human. So what those dislikes or hates around feedback, what that does to you and I, and to the people that you may manage, or your peers, your boss, your loved ones, neighbors, it activates a defense mechanism in their and your and my brain. So the fundamental organizing principle of the brain is two things. First of all, minimize danger and maximize reward. And for that, the brain tries to keep you and I safe. So when you receive feedback, or your direct report receives feedback from you, the chances are pretty high, if we don't deliver that effectively, if you don't deliver it mindfully, strategically, and empathetically, the chances are high that two small parts of the brain called the amygdala will be activated. And that is about the fight and flight mechanism. It really prevents the recipient of feedback from being present, listening, processing, because those amygdala are trying to keep us safe. So we're either going into attack mode, into denial mode, into defense mode. Maybe you recognize any of this. So all of this to say that the way you give feedback is often less than optimal, and not just you, it goes for all of us. So let's do something about that. Let's change that with these 6 main topics. And management author and consultant Ken Blanchard once said, feedback is the breakfast of champions, because without feedback about your performance or feedback for your direct report, I don't think we will learn and improve and grow much. And we also know receiving and delivering feedback is hard, as we just established. So how do we make this a reality, but also in a way that we're not all stressed and we don't activate unnecessarily those amygdala of ourselves or others? Now, obviously, we could talk about receiving feedback, but this, as you know from the title when you signed up, this webinar is focused on providing feedback. So let's go to part one. Meaningful and constructive feedback. So what's in a word? What does that even mean? What is meaningful? Well, one criterion that I like to use is that it is of value to the person. And we'll talk much more about that. But that already distinguishing, letting off steam and telling someone what you dislike, disapprove of, or what is going not according to your liking or your standards when you are emotional or upset. That already excludes that context. Now, what is constructive? That is in the eye of the beholder. And of course, I will present to you a couple of elements of what does feedback need when you provide it in order for the chances to be high that it is received as constructive. And so two elements are appropriate and respectful. But those are also words. And again, they're in the eye of the beholder. So the main strategy and approach here is to ask, align, and adjust. And I say that because how your direct reports, how your loved ones, how your boss, how your peers receive feedback, whether they label it as meaningful, of value, and constructive, that depends on so many factors that make us also extremely unique, like the culture you were raised in and the people that you provide feedback to, what kind of communication and feedback culture they were raised in. It depends maybe on the generation, the gender, the setting. And that's why I always, in my coaching and consulting practice, ask new clients, but also clients that I've worked with for months or even years, if situations change or they seem to be or feel more vulnerable, I'll ask them, what's your best way to receive feedback? What is your story around feedback? What would you like to see or hear me do or say? What would you not like to hear me or see me do or say? So that's the asking part. And then aligning my method, my preferred way to that person with their unique elements and their unique background. So you may have heard I have an accent. I was born and raised in the Netherlands. That makes me Dutch. And so Dutch people are known in the world, and this is very stereotyping and putting everyone in one little box. But in general, we are known to be relatively direct, whether we talk with peers, direct reports, people higher in the hierarchy, and we're known to be not beating around the bush and to be saying things as we see them. That is more direct than some other cultures, such as maybe the Midwestern culture or maybe certain Asian cultures. I think we have to be careful with talking about big groups and cultures, but of course there are so many differences. So two great resources are the Culture Map by Erin Meyer, if you're interested more in learning about different cultures and subcultures and how they generally perceive directness or indirectness. And then another really good book, I have the other one here as well, but this might be more attractive. It's relatively thin. I think it's a very practical, insightful book. It's called Saving Face: How to Preserve Dignity and Build Trust. So these are two resources that help us look from a mindful, cultural, and honoring differences perspective to what does it mean meaningful and constructive or mindful and constructive feedback. So there is not just one formula. We obviously know certain things that we shouldn't be doing, but having talked about meaningful and constructive a little bit, and we'll get back to that, what is the impact of really effective feedback? I think there are 8 wonderful things at least that it can result in. And I hope that you at least have 1 or 2 examples where you were given really good, effective, mindful, constructive feedback. And likely it led to one of these 8 or it had one of these impacts. I was working with a new client a couple of weeks ago, first meeting, an executive of a big nonprofit. And she said to me, I cannot remember one time that I received meaningful, helpful, actionable, useful feedback in a good context. And I thought, yeah, it's not the first time I hear someone say that, but that's tragic, because if you get more skilled and insightful and more comfortable, more practiced with giving that mindful and constructive and actionable feedback, it helps clarify performance expectations or performance challenges, and it can improve it. It helps with increasing someone's self-awareness, strengthens relationships as long as they perceive you to be on their team. It can also provide a bigger picture, because if you think about delivering feedback to direct reports, it can be very helpful if you speak to the impact of maybe behavior or how someone delivers results, that you not just paint a picture of that person and their direct impact on the people around them, but also looking from your higher level and larger organizational or departmental impact. So a lot of advantages of getting better at this. So delivering feedback mindfully. Again, what does that mean? It's a word, it's in the eye of the beholder, and it is about creating a meaningful dialogue, right? So that also requires some listening skills of you and I. So we'll talk about that as well. But look at these 4 elements: setting an intention, so being intentional and of value to the person rather than venting your frustration, right? Being fully present here and now. So not thinking of the difficult conversation you just had or the complicated meeting that you have to facilitate tomorrow, but being fully present here now with your own thoughts and emotions, and especially with the person that you are delivering feedback to. Remaining open and non-judgmental. It's 3 words, and I believe this to be one of the most challenging things to do for us generally, because our brains are so quick to connect dots, to create narratives, and therefore to also have judgments, interpretations, judgments, and that makes us very different and pretty successful as opposed to certain other groups of animals. So having a strong judgmental capability when it comes to decision making, whatever industry and level you work at, whether it comes to decision making in your private life around children and raising them, or around where to move, or whatever decision you have to make, that's awesome. And when it comes to relationships, we have to tame our judgment monster and try and postpone judgment a little longer, and really, with our full presence, listen and listen to the words when someone talks about either their performance or behavior in such a feedback conversation. And then deliver candor, yet with care and with compassion, because delivering candor doesn't mean I can say all I want, or that everything that might candidly come out of my mouth would be useful for the person. And of course, we want to attempt at least to step into that person's shoes, and whatever it is that we know about them, consider how they may be receiving the feedback, how it may make them feel and respond. So, part two. Maybe you've heard of the concept psychological safety, maybe not. It's very related to building rapport and to building trust. So let's look at a couple of frameworks that I think you might find very helpful. I'm referencing three experts, and on each of these, we could spend probably an hour or longer. So we won't, but I'll give you the names and the concept so you can dig in a lot more, or you can sign up for one of the courses that we so regularly provide, and especially in the whole leadership and communication realm. Some of these models, if not all, they are included in those courses. So first, Amy Edmondson. She wrote a book, Fearless Organization, and it's all about psychological safety. So what does that mean? It means that someone knows, your direct report or your peer or you know that you can speak up without risk of punishment, humiliation, being shut down, or any other negative consequence. And when I talk about speaking up, I think of pointing to a mistake or pointing to a flaw or suggesting a very different opinion or approach than maybe the boss or a peer. So psychological safety. Now there are a couple of people who are very knowledgeable about the topic. One of them is Timothy Clark, and he talks about 4 stages of psychological safety that need to be accomplished. And the first stage needs to happen first for people to really have candid yet respectful open conversations, because psychological safety looks like a lively yet respectful debate. It sounds like yes and answers and responses and comments rather than yes but. It looks like sharing personal experiences, so it requires some vulnerability. It looks like many different people are speaking and honestly and truly listening to each other, even if they disagree, and especially when they disagree. And there should be very little hindrance based on hierarchy in the organization or any other kind of power that someone may have. So Timothy talks about inclusion safety that is accomplished when your staff or you feel safe and belonging to the team. So you're comfortable being present on the team and in meetings, and you feel included as opposed to excluded. And you feel like you're wanted and appreciated on the team and in the meetings. Learner safety is as much as knowing that you can learn through asking, and that's, for example, the absence of having the experience of, oh, that must have been a dumb question because of the looks or the response that I got, right? That doesn't make it safe to learn through asking questions. And it also includes team members, staff, knowing that they can experiment and take some risks, which might include making some mistakes. Yet, if they are honest about the mistake, if they learn from the mistake, or if you learn from the mistake, they will not be punished in any kind of way. Contributor safety is about contributing your ideas, even if others don't get them, don't like them, and disagree with them. So that's again that respectful sharing of even opposing ideas and opinions. And then challenger safety, and it's all included in Amy's larger definition. Challenger safety means that you're allowed, regardless of your position, regardless of the topic, regardless of whom it is that you're challenging, that you can challenge opinions and thoughts and approaches. So you can look Timothy Clark up online. There is a whole PDF with a wealth of information, which if you're interested, I can highly recommend. And then the last expert is Stephen Covey, who talks about 13 high trust or behaviors of high trust leaders, but you can be an individual contributor and you still have to build trust with whatever stakeholders. So it's not just for leaders. And if you look him up, the Franklin Covey Company also has good PDFs online. If you just search in your preferred search engine the topic of 13 behaviors of high trust leaders, you will see these here. They talk about, some of them are more character-based, such as talking straight and demonstrating respect. They say that there are certain principles underlying them. There is always an opposite of talking straight or demonstrating respect to be defined, but also the counterfeit. So for talking straight, the counterfeit could be beating around the bush, right? Or for demonstrating respect, it could be faking concern for someone, right? So some other of the high trust behaviors, like, let's see, more the competency based, is delivering results, getting better, and confronting reality. That is competency and skill based. And then if you look at 3 of the last 4, listening first, keeping commitments, and extending trust, the Covey Company says that they are an almost equal combination of character and competence. So when it comes to character, characters can be formed, of course, but those might be harder to impact if you're thinking of someone else and getting someone else to demonstrating more of these high trust behaviors. But I invite you to just look at these 13 behaviors and identify 2. Whatever your role, whatever your level, whatever your context, industry, company size, culture, identify 2 that you know you could get better at in order to be that high trust leader, supervisor, professional, individual contributor. And I hope you've been able to identify 2. So let's go to a step-by-step process. So I'll present you with a 7-step process, but then also with 2 additional easy frameworks with reminders. So the 7-step process looks like this. Effective feedback. What do? You set the stage. So if you're going to deliver feedback in whatever context, you want to announce the topic and the goal. So the topic is, I would like to give you some feedback. If you want to make it more specific, and there is specificity needed in our feedback, you could say, I would like to give you some feedback and talk about some changes regarding your project management in Tech Titan, if that would be the title of the project. Then secondly, you want to describe behavior and actions. This is often challenging because many times we talk in terms of judgments or labels. So it could be, you missed 4 consecutive deadlines. And then the follow-up would be, help me understand what happened here. So that is the listening and the asking rather than the immediate jumping to conclusions. Or I did not receive information about the change that you made to X that has this impact on me or on the team or on the department. So that is already step 3, clarifying, contrasting, and especially discussing the impact. So it has X and Y and Z impact, and that's why we're having this conversation. Next, and I already mentioned, it's in step 2, describing the behavior and the action. I usually already invite a question and want to hear from the person, obviously. But if you haven't done that yet, in step 4, that's when you say, hey, tell me what you see. Tell me what your experience is. Tell me what your perspective is. And then that requires us to truly listen and not be thinking of our proof that whatever I'm hearing from that person is incorrect, right? So after you've come to an agreement of behaviors, results, actions, you want a person to state takeaways and specific actions. So, what will they be doing differently in order to either show different behavior, different attitude, different results? Diff- they are a variety of categories, of course, but I think it's really helpful if we invite the person to state their takeaways. And then, obviously, if they're not all aligned, if you're, say, the supervisor or the manager, and they're not aligned with the takeaways that you would like the person to see, that may mean you have to revisit some of the elements in step 2, describing the behavior and the action, as well as in step 3, discussing the impact. And maybe you could then ask again. So, did this create any additional takeaways? Or please, let's be candidly and compassionately direct. Say, hey, I have 2 or 3 other takeaways for you, or just one. Please consider that and let me know whether you're committed, because that is part of the step number 6, inquiring about the support that someone needs, but it also includes the commitment. I always ask when there is feedback that needs to lead to change, again, whether it's attitude, behaviors, results, or all of the above, I ask for what's your level of commitment to actually playing with this or putting this to practice. And then the last one is aligning with the person on when to revisit, because you want to see a certain change. And I would like to think that you want to be of support, of help to the person. So, part of this 7-step feedback could be Erin Meyer. It's the same person that I referenced earlier about the culture map. She talks about the 3 A's of feedback. So, as an overlaying principle, keep in mind that you want that feedback to be of assistance to the person. You want it to be actionable. That's why we talk about actions and behaviors and behavioral takeaways. And it's about asking first. So, questions are absolutely important, as in, does this resonate with you? Do you recognize this? Are there other perspectives that you may have? Are there things that I'm not putting on the table when we're discussing this element of your performance or your partnership with department X, Y, or Z? So asking those questions. So keep these 3 A's in mind. And then another one is the ABC formula for feedback. And you will see they're all very aligned. First of all, aim for something positive. So what is it that you're hoping for or wanting for this person? Not for you. It's not about venting a frustration or delivering feedback because other people are complaining. No, it's what do you hope for and want in a positive sense for the person? You want to keep that short, clear, optimistic. And of course, that should show how you care and that you're on that person's team. B, again, it's about the behaviors, what you literally observed. Can you do the videotape test? If you tell someone, I need you to be less dominant in those meetings, I cannot take a picture of dominant. I cannot videotape the word dominance. I can take a picture or an audio of my direct report interrupting regularly, or my direct report raising their voice in certain situations. So make sure that you leave out assumptions, feelings, judgments, and that you talk about behavior and actions. And then, just like the impact, here is the C for consequences. Don't skip that part, because it helps if the person realizes what the impact of their current actions or methods or behaviors are. And if you contrast that to something else, something different, hopefully better, right? How that may create a much more positive influence and deliver better or easier results for them. And that can heighten the motivation for the person to actually start acting upon the takeaways that you all agreed on. A Of course, there's so much more to say about this, and I am providing you with resources to dig in deeper. So let's breathe and go to asking questions and active listening. I generally say to clients, friends, our children, especially when they were young, I love questions. You know how children say, Mom, I have a question. One of my first responses was always, oh, not always, often was, oh, I love questions. And I really do, until they catch me off guard or are by my brain and my judgment monster perceived as unfair or threatening or coming out of an unexpected corner. So, even for those of you who are in the room who consider themselves really good listeners and askers of great questions, stay with this because we're not always as good as we think we are. So, listening, we could spend a whole hour on listening as well or longer. It's one of the most active and energy draining and a much more complicated skill than you and I might think when we don't think too deeply about listening. And the interesting thing about listening is that the word listen and silent, and you may know this, but they're made up of exactly the same letters. And I think there's a reason for that. Because in order for you and I to listen, we need to be silent. And that especially is relevant, crucial even, when emotions are at play, which we established at the beginning of the webinar is often the case, especially for the recipient, but also for the provider of feedback. Many of us don't like providing feedback. I don't know about you. I don't get up in the morning thinking, oh, I'm so excited about giving this tough feedback to this person. Or on the other end, the receiving end, oh, I hope I'm going to get quite a bit of feedback today. I mean, most of us don't wake up like that, right? So, listen and silent, both are needed in order to build that rapport, in order to be perceived and experienced as mindful and respectful. We need it in order to actually understand where the person is coming from and how their view may be different than our view. And it's crucial for you and I to collaborate and to be working with clients or other stakeholders, maybe partners. And so, in order for you and I to truly listen and focus on the person, you and I are tasked to silence a whole bunch of things in our environment. So we turn off the phone, we turn it around, but also, and maybe even more important, silence our voice and silence our thoughts. And those thoughts could be about something very unrelated. It could be related to the person. Yeah, they may be pressing some hot buttons based on previous interactions or struggles or meetings that we were in. And it could also be thoughts about literally what the person is saying right now. So, this is where taming that judgment monster comes into play again. So, whenever you or I notice that we're creating a narrative, activating an already existing narrative about the person, I hope you and I catch that we're doing that so that we can say, no, no more. I really want to be here now, listening, observing, really getting to a good connection and really getting a good grip on whatever it is, whatever behavior or actions or attitudes that we want to discuss here. So catch it early, and that's part of emotional intelligence, right? And always ask yourself regularly in these tougher conversations, am I truly listening? And, the easiest answer is, yes, I am. I really am. But then ask again, am I truly listening right now? Or am I waiting to respond in order to disprove what someone just said or to defend myself or a team member or a colleague, or to just speak and try and overrule whatever their input is. So, are you actually listening, or are you thinking of how you're going to respond? That's the question. As well as, are you trying to be right in this exchange, or are you trying to get it right? And that requires also at times humility and vulnerability in the sense of saying, hey, hmm, I didn't think of that lens or that perspective, or I didn't have that information. So I think there are some good points that you're making, or I think I may have been partially wrong with whatever conclusion or how I interpreted something that I observed, right? So, as the provider of feedback, it's important to be able and willing to say, hey, I am completely or partially wrong, or I think I may have jumped to conclusions, or whatever it is. And that doesn't make you hesitant or not confident. It makes it for a true, authentic exchange and a true looking at what are the results or the behaviors or the actions that we're really wanting to see differently. So I already said it at the beginning. Listening is energy draining. It is a laborious job. All kinds of things get in the way, the internal distractions. If you have to deliver feedback and you're not so happy because of the person, maybe he, she, they are a little bit in your interpersonal allergy zone with certain behaviors, or you are in their interpersonal allergy zone, or maybe you just feel bad about having to address it, or whatever the reason is. Make sure that you're not hungry, hopefully not tired, not too worried, and definitely not upset. Because when we're upset, things come out of our mouths. Maybe not yours, but most people, and mine for sure. And that usually isn't pretty. It usually isn't mindful. It usually isn't, I'm on your team, right? So make sure that those internal distractions are not there. Make sure you always have sufficient water so that you can calm yourself down. Make sure you breathe deeply and that you really made the space and the time to be in the same physical or virtual, but especially psychological space with the person. And then the external distractions, please try and avoid those as well, right? So, one specific form of internal distractions is obviously biases. You can look up 20 most common biases. You probably are familiar with the term confirmation bias. So, what you and I already believe to be true about a person, that is what your and my brain is focused on. So the brain starts looking for evidence of what we already believe to be true, whether that is realistic or not, and it discounts evidence of the opposite. That's literally what our brain does. But we have control over parts of our brain, of course, so that's no excuse to apply cognitive bias. So, one of the good questions to ask in order to push back on confirmation bias, and again, it's only one of the examples, is to ask, what may I not be inquiring about? What may I not be willing to ask or to see or to consider? Another one is, what if I am partially or completely wrong? What may I not be seeing? What may I be overemphasizing? What may I be underemphasizing? So those are several questions and reflections that can help keep confirmation bias at bay. So a couple of things here. Listen first, listen longer, harder, and listen differently. When I say differently, make sure that you are not listening autobiographically. So that means based on your upbringing, your values, your perspective, your hierarchical level, or your function on the team, in the organization, in the family, but listen other oriented, right? Not from our own world and emotions and desires and frustrations. So, ready for part 5? Navigating challenges with emotional intelligence. And you will see part 5 and part 6 are very closely related. Emotional intelligence, we have webinars online about that as well, and of course courses at CCAPS. But emotional intelligence is really 4 things mostly. It's awareness in 2 areas, and it's management in 2 areas. So self-awareness is one of the 2 awareness areas. So realizing what you are experiencing, sensing right now in this moment as you were listening to this webinar, and knowing about and catching it early, whether you're hungry or getting cold or in pain, but also whether thoughts are starting to race, which will interfere with listening and connecting. So that is self-awareness. But then there is also other awareness, and awareness about what happens between you and that person. What's the dynamic? Are you in each other's allergy zone? Are you connecting well? And everything in between, right? And then the other end, or the other side, is management. So it's great to know whether you're distracted or the judgment monster is overly active, but then how do you manage that, right? So those are the skills with some of the questions and tips that you already received. So self-awareness and self-management. And then we obviously have relationship awareness, other awareness, and relationship management, right? So how do you manage what's happening in that space, in that conversation that you're having with the person? So challenging situations can arise because we might step into some of the feedback pitfalls. One is comparing people to each other rather than against their own goals and their own strengths and their own weaknesses, or whatever you want to call them. Let's call things by their name, right? So that is a pitfall because it's about this person, their behaviors, actions, results, and the impact on the team, on the organization, or maybe in the family or in the sports club. And secondly, giving feedback without inviting and listening to the other person's comments, their perspective. Maybe you've had that once or more than once happen to you, whether you were provided with feedback, but it was a one-way conversation, it was a one-way street. Maybe there was the question of, so are we aligned here? But the person didn't really want to hear what you were thinking and what you see as your attitude or behavior or actions and the impact, right? Number 3, looking only at extreme behavior and ignoring other efforts. So obviously extreme behavior with big impacts do need to be addressed. Yet there is usually more to a person, right? Now, that's not to say that if you have to deliver feedback that I would like you to use the sandwich method, because I don't. If you do use that method and it works for you, then we'll happily disagree with each other. There are different methods for different people. But the sandwich method, which is what we used to suggest to people in the, I think it was still in the 90s, is you first give a compliment. That's the bottom part of the bun, the sandwich. Then you deliver the criticism. And then to pack it all up and to leave happily, which usually didn't happen anyway, is you end it with a compliment, the top part of the sandwich. So you have bread, the meat, and bread. And the bread is supposed to be fuzzy, warm, and positive. Now, I don't know about you, but when people give me feedback like that, I hear the compliment and I'm waiting for the but, or I'm waiting for what they really want to share with me. And then after that, if they give me another compliment, my brain is still processing the criticism or the critical feedback or the improvement feedback that I received. So here is what I suggest you do, and it relates to building rapport and it relates to building psychological safety and trust. Put daily deposits of trust in your bank of relationships. And one of those is provide compliments whenever you can, in specific terms, in a way that the person likes to receive it. Some people love it when it's in front of others. I also have clients and friends and family members who don't like that. So I align with that. If you put these daily deposits of trust and of appreciation, gratitude, compliments in your bank of relationships with people, then highly likely you don't need to first give them a compliment and thereby already set yourself up for maybe being perceived as inauthentic because the meat of your conversation is the criticism or the need for improvement, right? So, as you can tell, I'm passionate about this because I've seen it go wrong when we sandwich, and I see it go a lot better when we don't do that. But again, that requires those daily deposits. And then, of course, neglecting to confirm a mutual understanding of expectations moving forward, especially when it comes to performance improvement feedback. It's really important. That's why you saw that as the steps. Let's see, it was steps 5, 6, and 7, that takeaways and requesting or inquiring what kind of support is needed, but also aligning on when to revisit to see for improvement or change. That's really important. And then a couple more. Obviously, no surprise to you, jumping to conclusions and judging in the absence of facts. If you notice yourself doing that, that would be your self awareness. Don't beat yourself up, makes you human. We all do this. We do judge in the absence of facts, and we do jump to conclusions and all those other shortcuts that our brain take, and all the other forms of bias, which we will briefly touch upon. But just acknowledge it and push it aside and reset. No need to beat yourself up for being human, yet it is your and my responsibility when we provide feedback to do that in the most authentic, but also constructive and meaningful way, right? Because that's what this webinar is about. And then reluctance to discuss the hard stuff openly and timely usually sets us up for dealing with inefficiencies or underperformance much longer than is necessary. So procrastination usually only makes it harder. And it's also often perceived as unfair. How often I hear from my coaching clients, I wished I would have gotten this feedback so much earlier, even though I didn't like it. And I find it hard to face, whether it's imperfections or certain elements of their attitude or whatever it is. But it feels unfair. So think of it as doing yourself, but especially the other person, a favor. Now, we're all uniquely different. We addressed briefly cultural, subcultural differences, gender, style, personality differences. So, just a few reminders on the left hand side. We are all uniquely different. And the way I like to receive feedback might not be yours. And the way I like to discuss imperfections, especially my own, might not be yours. The way you like to do it may not be your peers or direct reports, your partners. So keep that in mind. Also keep in mind that you and I, if we're a little bit human, we prefer think and act alikes. But maybe that partner or child, neighbor, boss, family member is not similar to you when it comes to thinking and acting. So how can you get more comfortable and more aware of that? I already used the term, we all tend to respond autobiographically and listen autobiographically, so be aware of that. We all have those interpersonal allergies or hot buttons, and we all tend to attribute things self-servingly. So that our self-esteem and our being effective and good people remains intact. And that's only logical. It's a self-preserving mechanism. And at times we have to realize that we can be wrong. We can make mistakes. We can jump to conclusions. So a few keys in that respect: engage in honest self-reflection in the moment, but also after delivering feedback. Activate a really curious mindset, not curious as in nosy, but curious as in really wanting to understand the person's world, context, what they're dealing with, maybe the pressures in the job, in the position, or the complicated clashes of behaviors on their team, whatever it is. Suspend those judgments a little longer in the conversation as you are delivering feedback and as you are putting to practice many of these tips. They're never a guarantee that everything will be happy and lucky and easy, because it's all so uniquely personal. And we don't know what's just been going on in that other person's life or mind. We don't know what meeting they just came out of. Maybe you do because you came out of the same meeting. But we don't know what's going on in someone's context. So I like to own my piece in dynamics most of the time. And if my family members were lined up behind me, they would say, yeah, and sometimes not. And that's true. But it's really important that we own whatever we're creating in that feedback conversation, because maybe I interrupted the person. Maybe you did use a judgment rather than a observable action. Maybe you did compare the person with someone else rather than with their own strengths, weaknesses, aspirations, and job responsibilities. So own whatever it is that you did. So I have learned the hard way to be able to say, hey, I would like to rephrase that. Or, hey, I regret that I said that in this way because I think it's not the most mindful or the most accurate or whatever it is. I mean, whatever you and I have said, we cannot delete as what we do in an email. When you are crafting an email and you read it again before you send it, you can delete and add and do all these things. But we'll talk about editing in the moment. And then, no surprise, dial up to listening and asking great questions. So part 5 and 6 are intricately, I think that's the right word, connected to each other. So a little bit more about handling resistance and defensiveness. First of all, please realize that it's human nature to maybe resist feedback or become a little defensive. You and I have acted like that. So activate that compassion. And a couple of tips: remain focused on what's really relevant, what's constructive. Don't allow yourself or the other person to drag in things that may not be the main thing. And also keep a molehill, and don't turn it into a mountain, right? And then some phrases, and I'll give you a couple more, but hey, I am on your team. That requires you to really be on the person's team, right? So if you feel like you're not, then that's a different situation. Another phrase is, help me understand your response right now, or your emotion, or how do you suggest we continue this conversation if you think it's not really going well? And of course, you have to say that with a caring, kind attitude, because how do you suggest to continue this conversation? That obviously is not even just passive aggressive. I think that's aggressive. So think in terms of all the attitudes and actions and skills that you use, as in terms of, am I pushing the person now, or am I pulling them towards a agreed upon view on their behavior, their actions, their impact, and their effectiveness? So pushing is more convincing the other person rather than understanding them. It's often done by repeating yourself or interrupting. Often, when you're in a push mode, you will be speaking more and louder. And I'm saying often because we're all uniquely different. And it might be that you're more looking to command and control and force, even if you don't realize it. So that could be good reflection as well. And then the pull is connecting, listening, asking questions by which you create a dialogue, stepping into someone's world and the dynamics um, that they're facing and that they're having to manage, and ask, listen, and work to understand, which doesn't mean necessarily that you work to agree, right? That's not what I'm saying, but work to understand each other. And for that, we need to be silent and listen. Now, just to emphasize the importance of blind spots and biases, we use them, our brain uses them. They are shortcuts to simplify and to use rules of thumb that make us quicker in our decision making and in doing our work and relating to people. And then they can also turn into thinking and interacting errors and into distortions of reality. So I mentioned three of the main biases if you think of a list of 20 or 25. And I urge you, if you're interested, I think it's on all of us, it's our responsibility to educate ourselves about biases. And a really good book, and it's behind me, that's why I'm tempted to turn around. It's called Blind Spot. And it's about, the subtitle is, oh, should I turn around? Biases of Good People, I believe. But the book, green cover, Blind Spot. So I think it's our responsibility to educate ourselves. We cannot eradicate every bias, but we can do our job and make sure that we're aware, that we catch it early, and that we minimize their workings. So diving a little deeper, I said I was going to present you some more sentences. So here are additional sentences that you can adjust for specific situations, but they are born out of a mutual commitment to be accountable for whatever role we play in the dynamic and the atmosphere, but also for creating clarity. So you can adjust these to your situation. You can add to these, but I always like to have a couple of really good questions ready. And also questions to ask myself. And I've been giving you these already. What else could I inquire about? What may I not be getting or seeing? What may I be overemphasizing? So these are really good self-reflective questions. And then the in the moment, this is the last piece, course correcting. Let me rephrase that. I realize I can say this in a better way, namely, it seems to me we're not fully aligned or that we're stuck. What do you think? So these are really good in the moment course correcting sentences in those feedback conversations that may become hard or may become a little tense or emotional. So with that, I believe it is 12:59. So if there are questions, I'd love to address some of them.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Carolyn, for sharing so many great tools. One of our listeners did mention using the term feed forward, which I thought was very
Yes.
interesting rather than
Oh,
feedback.
yes,
I
I
found that
love
very
it.
interesting. Yeah.
Mhm.
So we might not have time for a ton of questions. If anyone wants to submit their questions to ccapsinfo@umn.edu, I can pass those on to Carolyn as well. But I will go with one question here, which I thought was great. How do you adjust your feedback delivery to someone who is neurotypical, such as those who have autism?
Oh, that's a whole special area. That's an excellent question. So, people who are on the autistic spectrum can be many different or can show many different elements of neurodiversity, right? So I think it's an excellent question because we need to be very mindful of not just personality and culture styles, but also neurodiversity. And so it depends on what kind of, uh, call it, diagnosis or behavior it is that this person makes this person unique, right? So it could be what we call very light on the spectrum or more on the other end of the spectrum. I think the best way to handle this, or one of the elements of a good way of handling this, is to ask how the person appreciates receiving feedback. And this is what I mentioned really early on. And you may not be able to do all of what they request because it may lead to unclear feedback if they have certain desires or wishes. But I think even just asking that question and listening to someone's experience with feedback and how they like to grow and learn about what they're doing really well and what they might have to improve, simply inquiring, how would you want to have those conversations? What should I do? What shouldn't I do? And what kind of delivery is helpful for you and what kind of delivery would be upsetting or unclear to you. I think that's the interaction, the conversation that you should have, because there is not one method for certain people with certain types of neurodiversity, right?
Yeah.
But excellent question, thank you for
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, so I'll just have you share the last slide for me, please. Again,
Yes, of
those
course.
questions I didn't get to, feel free to contact the college email, which will be on this last slide that we also shared in the slide deck. But let me just go over here. As I mentioned earlier, we will send a link to the webinar recording within a week of today's webinar. The recording will also be posted on our CCAP's webinar archive, and that should be posted sometime this week. Speaking of feedback, we also appreciate feedback. So if you want to use that QR code, if you want to have any suggestions for future presentations, please use that, which will also be listed in the chat if you aren't able to scan that right now. And this is specifically for our human employees. If you have questions about how to submit your points for that, please use the link there and you can get that all set. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you, Carolyn, and you all have a wonderful rest of your afternoon.
Thank you, everyone.